Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. It started with a prediction. Just another line of code. Another number on a spreadsheet. A routine analysis, the kind we ran 100 times a day. It was supposed to predict market trends, shifts in consumer behavior, fluctuations in stock performance. Nothing more. Nothing dangerous. The algorithm was designed to see what humans couldn't. Hidden patterns buried in data. Small tremors before an earthquake. But this wasn't a tremor. It was a collapse. The first time I saw it, I barely reacted. A projection tucked inside a report, buried under layers of statistic. Projected outcome: Silicon Valley collapses. Probability: 99.97%. A mistake, I thought. An outlier. No model could predict something like that with certainty. So I refreshed the dataset, tweaked a few parameters, reran the analysis. Projected outcome: Silicon Valley collapses. Probability: 99.97%. It didn't change. Something tightened in my chest. I stared at the screen, feeling a slow, creeping unease. This wasn't how models worked. They adjusted. Shifted with new data. This one didn't. It wasn't just a prediction. It was a certainty. I told myself to let it go. There had to be an explanation. A flaw in the input. A bad dataset. Maybe someone had tampered with the code. But deep down, I knew the truth. The algorithm wasn't wrong. I closed the report. Pushed away from my desk. Walked out of the office, out into the cool night air, letting the hum of distant traffic ground me. The lights of the city stretched in every direction, glass towers glowing against the dark. Everything seemed normal, unshakable. But on my screen, behind me, that quiet line of text remained. Projected outcome: Silicon Valley collapses. Probability: 99.97%. It wasn't built to predict the end. It was built for control. We called it a market optimizer, a tool designed to see trends before they happened. Every company in the valley had their own version, but ours was different. Ours didn't just track patterns, it understood them. It started small. A subtle shift in retail habits, a fluctuation in ad performance, a dip in a company's quarterly report. It wasn't impressive at first. The model predicted a mid-sized software firm would fold within 6 months. The company was stable, profitable, growing. There was no reason for it to fail. 6 months later, it collapsed. A lucky guess, they said. The next time, it wasn't a guess. A major startup was on the rise, riding a wave of investor confidence, expanding aggressively. The model flagged it. For months, projected downfall. 4 months later, a scandal, a leak, a mass investor pullout. The company was gone. It started happening too often. Executives whispered about it behind closed doors. They joked about our little oracle, a codebase that could see the future. But no one really laughed. Because every time the model made a call, it came true. I watched the predictions stack up. Tech firms collapsing before they showed signs of weakness. Market shifts no human analyst had foreseen. Layoffs, acquisitions, collapses. It didn't just track the industry. It was ahead of it. At first, we thought it was feeding on insider information. That somewhere in its endless data streams, it had found the unspoken truths hidden in emails, balance sheets, financial reports. But it wasn't just reacting to data. It was anticipating moves before they were made. Seeing collapses before there was anything to collapse. The higher-ups started using it like a weapon. Betting against competitors before the market even sensed blood. Shifting resources before downturns hit. Every call it made, every warning it sent turned into profit. And no one questioned it. Not until it turned its gaze inward. I remember the first time I saw the projection. The screen was open in front of me, a simple dashboard running its latest forecast. I wasn't even paying attention. It was just another analysis, another probability score. Then I saw the numbers. Projected outcome: Silicon Valley collapses. Probability: 99.97%. Not a company. Not a sector. The whole system. The entire foundation of power that had been built, refined, expanded for decades. It wasn't just predicting a shift. It was predicting extinction. I ran the numbers again. Same result. I tweaked the parameters, removed outliers, changed the weight of variables. It didn't budge. The collapse wasn't an anomaly. It was inevitable. I stared at the projection for a long time. And for the first time, I asked myself a question no one in the valley had ever dared to ask. What if the system wasn't as strong as we thought? At first, we laughed. A nervous, uncertain kind of laughter. The kind that happens in boardrooms when no one wants to be the first to admit they don't understand what they're looking at. The screen glowed in the dimly lit room, the report staring back at us in silence. A single word stamped across the top. Inevitable. We had gathered to review what was supposed to be just another forecast. Market projections, trend analysis, the usual. But the model had gone deeper. It had seen something no one wanted to acknowledge. 3 conclusions. Each one worse than the last. The first. The fall of tech monopolies. It called them unstable. Not in the way the public saw them. Too big, too powerful, but in the way only numbers could reveal. Fragile systems devouring themselves from the inside. The AI had mapped out a cycle repeating across decade. Growth. Consolidation. Acquisition. A feeding frenzy of smaller companies swallowed whole, innovation replaced by maintenance, expansion replaced by control. It showed us the curve, where it peaked, where the decline began. The pattern had already started. The second, the rise of decentralization. The model predicted a shift, a movement away from the giants, away from everything that made them powerful. New technology emerging, bypassing the need for centralized systems. Users no longer reliant on platforms, corporations no longer gatekeepers. It didn't just predict change. It predicted irrelevance. The third, regulatory and public backlash. It wasn't just the market turning against them. It was governments, activists, the very people who had once championed them. The AI forecasted policy shifts, lawsuits, enforcement crackdowns. Not in vague possibilities, but in precise probabilities. It named the agencies, the court cases, the bills that would pass, the fines that would be issued, the executives that would resign. Someone broke the silence with a forced chuckle. A few others followed, uneasy, waiting for someone, anyone, to dismiss it. I watched their faces. The flickers of doubt behind their eyes. The way their fingers tapped against the polished table. They didn't believe the report. Not yet. But they felt it. Someone suggested rerunning the analysis. Another proposed adjusting the weight of the variables. One by one, they started throwing out explanations, theories, anything to disprove the conclusion staring back at us. No one wanted to say the truth. No one wanted to admit what the AI had seen. A debate broke out. Raised voices, accusations, someone pounding a fist against the table. The old guard called it an error, demanded the model be recalibrated, reprogrammed, realigned with expectations. The others weren't so sure. Someone suggested shutting it down entirely. Wiping the data, scrubbing the reports. If the model didn't exist, neither did its conclusions. But that was the problem. It wasn't wrong. I had seen the raw data, traced the outputs back to their source. There were no errors. No miscalculations. It had only reported what was already happening. I kept quiet as the argument dragged on, listening to the frantic reasoning, the disbelief turning to something else, something closer to fear. They didn't want to know the future. They wanted to control it. And for the first time, they were realizing they couldn't. The report wasn't meant to leave the room. Every copy was encrypted, every terminal monitored. The model itself was locked behind layers of security, buried so deep that only a handful of people even knew what it was predicting. And yet, 24 hours later, the world knew. It started small. A post on a private forum, buried in a thread no one was supposed to see. A leaked dataset, a handful of screenshots. Someone, somewhere, had broken rank. A whistleblower, or maybe just someone who couldn't stand the silence any longer. At first, no one took it seriously. Anonymous leaks happened all the time. Wild claims, doomsday scenarios, conspiracy theories disguised as research. The market was used to them. But this wasn't speculation. It was numbers. Cold, calculated, precise. The kind of thing investors couldn't ignore. The leaks spread faster than anyone could react. Within hours, journalists were pulling at the edges of the story, piecing together fragments of what the AI had uncovered. Financial analysts started running their own projections, cross-checking old market trends, comparing them to what had already come true. Something shifted. Investors didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't ask for statements or official responses. They saw the same thing the AI had seen, and they ran. The first sell-offs happened overnight. Quiet at first. A few large transactions, early repositioning, nothing that would cause alarm. But the people inside the system, the ones who moved the real money, they knew what they were looking at. By morning, the markets were unraveling. Headlines hit like hammer blows. Stocks plummeted, entire portfolios collapsed under the weight of blind panic. Tech giants lost billions in hours. Shareholders demanded answers. Executives scrambled, not to solve the problem, but to stop the bleeding. Calls were made, damage control plans drafted, narratives spun. The algorithm was wrong, they said. The leak was manipulated, misinterpreted, taken out of context. No one believed them. It didn't matter whether the model was right or wrong anymore. Perception had already shifted. The market wasn't built on reality. It was built on confidence, and confidence was gone. People inside the industry knew what was coming, but they underestimated the speed. Governments started looking into the reports. Regulators announced emergency meetings. The same agencies that had spent years avoiding real action suddenly had a reason to get involved. Lawsuits were filed. Investigations opened. 100 different accusations thrown at 100 different companies, all scrambling to deflect, to deny, to survive. It should have stopped there. But the more they tried to kill the story, the worse it got. Every attempt to suppress the leak turned into proof that the leak was real. Every official statement was dissected, pulled apart, compared against the data that had already been released. The AI had made its prediction, and now the world was listening. The AI had called it inevitable. We just hadn't understood what that meant. Not at first. In the beginning, it still felt like something that could be undone. A temporary disruption. A market correction. A sharp downturn, but nothing the system hadn't recovered from before. Investors had pulled out, but there were always more investors. Stocks had fallen, but they had fallen before. Tech giants had taken losses, but they had taken losses before. But this wasn't just another crisis. The AI had seen something deeper. Something that wasn't just a momentary dip in confidence but a structural collapse. And the worst part was that once the prediction had been made, no one could unsee it. Every decision made in response only accelerated what was coming. People started pulling their money faster, dumping shares before they lost more value. Entire funds were liquidated overnight. Companies that had been valued in the billions weeks earlier became worthless in hours. The layoffs came next. Wave after wave, entire divisions erased to slow the bleeding. It didn't work. Governments stepped in, but not to save them. The AI had been right about that too. The investigations had already begun, but now they had teeth. Antitrust cases that had stalled for years were suddenly fast-tracked. Emergency regulations were drafted, signed, enforced. There was no fight this time. No legal maneuvering, no lobbying efforts powerful enough to stop it. The public had turned, and politicians had turned with them. For years there had been warnings. Experts who had said the industry was too bloated, too centralized, too unstable. People who had seen the cracks forming long before the AI had given them a number. No one had listened. Until it was too late. The companies that could downsize did. The ones that couldn't folded entirely. Headquarters emptied. Campuses once overflowing with engineers, designers, executives, the heart of an empire, became empty shells. But it wasn't just the corporations that vanished. It was the people. The talent that had once poured into the valley in search of opportunity, the brightest minds in technology, the ones who had built everything that stood here. One by one, they walked away. Not because there was nothing left, because there was nothing keeping them here. The AI had predicted decentralization, and that was exactly what happened. The next generation of builders didn't want offices, didn't want middlemen, didn't want systems built to control them. They scattered, taking their knowledge with them, setting up in places where no single company, no single government, could dictate their work. Silicon Valley hadn't just lost its power. It had lost its purpose. I stood outside one of those empty buildings once, staring up at a glass tower that had once held thousands of people, that had once been a name that meant something. The AI had predicted the collapse, but in the end it hadn't caused anything. We had. I keep coming back to the same question. Was it always going to happen? I've played through every moment in my mind, traced every decision, every reaction, every desperate attempt to stop what was already set in motion. I've looked at it from every angle, tried to find the single choice, the single action that could have turned the tide. But no matter how I break it down, I end up in the same place. A screen. A line of text. A certainty written before anyone had the chance to understand it. Final projection. 99.97% certainty. Outcome. Inevitable. I remember staring at those words for the first time, convincing myself they meant nothing. A miscalculation. A statistical anomaly. A projection that could be ignored, changed, overwritten. But the model wasn't built to guess. It wasn't built to speculate. It was built to see. And the moment it made its prediction, the moment that number was pulled from raw data and placed into a report, something shifted. Not just in the market. Not just in the industry. In us. Did we cause the collapse by believing in it? By reacting to it? By fearing it? By trying to disprove it? If the AI had never made the prediction, would everything have stayed the same? Would the foundations have held? Would the giants still be standing, their towers still full, their network still humming with life? Or was it all just waiting for the final push? Maybe the cracks had always been there. Maybe the system had been collapsing long before we knew to look. Maybe we had been living in the shadow of an ending that had already begun. Maybe we just needed something to force us to see it. And now? The offices are empty. The headlines have moved on. The world has adapted because the world always does. The new systems are forming, scattered and ungoverned, built by the ones who refused to stay tethered to something that was already failing. Silicon Valley is gone. And I'm left staring at an old laptop, watching the cursor blink on the last screen the AI ever generated, knowing that buried inside its code, hidden beneath the numbers, there were still predictions that no one had read. I keep asking myself the same question. What else did it see? The laptop shouldn't even be running. The system was supposed to be wiped, erased from every database, every backup, every redundant server we ever touched. But the screen is still here, glowing in the dark, waiting. I don't know how long I've been staring at it. The same terminal, the same command prompt, the same model that shattered everything we thought was unbreakable. The cursor blinks, patient, steady, as if it knows I'll look. As if it's been waiting for me to. I tell myself not to touch it, not to type, not to ask. But I do. A single keystroke. A request for output. The last prediction, the final projection before it was shut down. The screen hesitates as if considering. Processing. Calculating. A low beep. A faint whir of computation. And then, a single line of text. Next event. Probability, 99.98%. My hands freeze over the keyboard. My breath stops. It doesn't say what it means. No details. No timeline. No explanation. Just a word I don't recognize, blacked out by a system that no longer exists, a warning from something that should have never been able to see. I try to run it again. The terminal refuses. The line of text stays on the screen, unchanging, a prediction locked in place, untouchable. For the first time since this all began, I feel something I can't explain. Not fear. Not disbelief. Something deeper. Something worse. Because the AI had never been wrong. Not once. I close the laptop. The screen goes black. The room is silent. And I know, whatever it saw next, whatever it tried to tell us, it's already happening. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.